So here we are in Acts chapter 25. Paul has now got a new governor of the area to deal with. Felix is out, Festus is in. So verse 1, now when Festus was come into the province, after 3 days he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul and besought him and desired favor against him, that he would send for him to Jerusalem, laying wait in the way to kill him. So Festus is in, he's making his rounds, talking to the people, dealing with what's going on, establishing his reign. The high priests inform Festus, hey, you've got this prisoner that Felix wouldn't release named Paul. If you release him, send him our way. We would like to question him. Now, again, they want to kill him. Now, I don't know about those guys that had that oath that they wouldn't eat or drink till Paul was dead, but it's been 2 years. They probably got to the point where they went, okay, this isn't happening. I'm going to go back to eating and drinking before I die. It was probably just a couple days later, basically, when they knew this was going to be a long haul and they're not getting Paul out. They gave up, but now they still want to kill him. So Festus began his term with a courtesy visit to Jerusalem, where the dignitaries joined in asking him to send Paul back to that city, for there was another plot to murder him as soon as he was out of Roman hands. But Festus properly pointed out that since the administrative headquarters were at Caesarea, it would be better for them all to come there. In the Roman magisterium, legislative, executive, and judicial authority all resided in a single exalted official. Paul declared in the court that he had broken no laws of the Jews, no laws of the temple, or the Roman laws. To keep the Jews satisfied, Festus asked Paul if he wouldn't be willing to go to Jerusalem. Why, said Paul, I'm standing now before Caesar's judgment seat, the only proper court for this case. I am innocent, and I appeal to Caesar. Conferring with legal counsel, Festus saw his chance to get rid of Paul by sending him to Rome. So this is Hugh Nibley paraphrasing this story, what we're going to get today. So that gives you an idea of what's going to happen. So Festus went down, talked to the high priests, and they're like, hey, dude, if you want to help us out and we'll you scratch our back, we scratch your back, send Paul to us so we can question him. He's broken our laws. Send him to us. We've got this weird mess of putting him in your hands. He doesn't need to be in your hands. Just send him to us, because they've got another plot to kill Paul on the way. Verse 4, but Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself would depart shortly thither. Let them therefore, said he, which among you are able, go down with me and accuse this man if there be any wickedness in him. So Festus is like, but Paul's a Roman citizen. I'm not turning him over to the Jews. If you want to accuse him of stuff, you can come to us. Come to my palace. We'll talk there. So verse 6, and when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, he went down unto Caesarea. And the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. And when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about, and laid many and grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. While he answered for himself, so this is Paul answering for himself, okay, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar have I offended anything at all. So Paul's like, I didn't do what they're accusing me of. I didn't break any of their laws. I am a Jew. I have Jewish by heritage. So I was right to be in the temple. I was right to do the cleansing. I was right to do all that. I did everything in the temple. Fine. That was following the Jewish laws. And I haven't broken any Roman laws either. So I'm innocent of everything that they're saying. Verse 9, but Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, a political favor basically, answered Paul and said, wilt thou go up to Jerusalem and there be judged of these things before me? So he's like, why don't we go, well, I'll tell you what, let's go to Jerusalem and we can solve this there. So maybe Festus knows the plot. That, hey, look, I know this Paul's a thorn in your side. Look, he's a thorn in our side too. We just want to get rid of him. Come judge him at our place. Bring him down and we will have him assassinated. Maybe Festus knows about the plot. Maybe he's just wanted to go along with this. I don't know why he would want to go along with it, though. Like, why would he go to Jerusalem to judge somebody when he can judge him from his position of power in Caesarea? So Paul, in verse 10, then said Paul, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as thou very well knowest. So again, Festus is saying, why don't we go to Jerusalem and you can be judged down there? I'll send you down that way and you can be judged there. And you can deal with this with the Jewish leaders. And Paul's like, no, I am a Roman citizen. I should be judged of Roman law, which is Caesar, is the ultimate law in Rome, and you are his representative in this area. So I am exactly where I need to be judged, basically. Verse 11, for if I be an offender or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal unto Caesar. So again, the real problem is the Jewish leaders are causing this stir. I didn't do anything wrong. They're accusing me of wrongdoing, but I didn't do anything wrong. Okay, as a Roman citizen, he had the right to have his case heard by Caesar. So he's appealing it. If you're not gonna issue a judgment, Festus, then I'm appealing to Caesar. So he has that right as a Roman citizen to go up. So verse 12, then Festus, when he had conferred with council, answered, hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar shalt thou go. So he's like, fine, we're going to send you to Caesar, basically, who's in Rome. Remember, Paul's been wanting to go to Rome. Jesus reminded Paul, you're going to testify of me in Rome. Paul's now going to Rome. Verse 13, and after certain days, King Agrippa and Bernice came into Caesarea to salute Festus. So now we get some more people in here. Let me get my notes pulled back up here. So soon after, Herod Agrippa, king of the Jews, came with his wife to pay a courtesy call on the new governor, and among other things, Festus raised the case of Paul. So Herod Agrippa, remember, it was his daughter that was married to Felix. And Festus is now replacing them as the governor. So Agrippa is coming to talk with him, and as a courtesy call, basically, let's make sure we get ourselves aligned together here. Whose position was now extremely dangerous, for Herod Agrippa was a personal friend of the Emperor Claudius, with whom he had been to school, and had been made king of the Jews by the helping hand of the Roman 10th Legion. Because Herod was only half Jewish, the desire of his life was to be accepted by the people as their legitimate ruler. So here we have Herod eager to gratify the Romans and the Jews, Festus supporting him as his best chance of controlling the populace, and the only thing that would quiet them was to appease the rowdy factions, and the only thing that would satisfy them was Paul's head. So Agrippa Jr. and his sister Bernice were two of the 5 children born to Agrippa the first and his wife Cypros. Their father, though inheritor of Herod's throne, was a wastrel who dragged his family all over the Middle East from pillar to post, trying to escape his debtors. The men in the Herod dynasty were all descendants from Herod the Great, the Idumean Arab who was the first Roman-appointed king of the Jews in Jerusalem, and his fame is famous for trying to kill Jesus in the slaughter of the innocents. That was around 4 to 6 BC. Agrippa and Bernice's childhood was filled with instability, and they inherited the bad blood seen in all of Herod the Great's descendants. Agrippa too and Bernice spent years of their childhood and most of their adult life in Rome, where all Roman client kings, like their father Agrippa first, sent their royal children to be educated. Thus the 2 siblings, Herod the Great's great-grandchildren, were Romanized and began an incestuous relationship, even though Bernice was politically married off occasionally to several small kingdom kings. She had 3 husbands, the first when she was 13. The 3 marriages all ended, and by age 22, she was single again. Bernice left and Agrippa lived together in Rome, and soon it was rumored they were incestuous. So Bernice and Agrippa are like brother and sister, and so they decide, let's just be together. Not much shocked the Romans, but this was prohibited in all the laws of the ancient world. One could marry a close relative like an uncle, aunt, or first cousin, but never a brother or sister. That was anathema, Latin for anathema, a cursed thing. Agrippa's contemporary, the Roman Juvenal, in his Satire 6, made open fun of Agrippa and Bernice and of Jewish customs. Quote, a diamond of great renown, made precious by the finger of Bernice, it was given as a present by the barbarian Agrippa to his incestuous sister in that country where kings celebrate festal Sabbaths with bare feet and where a long established clemency suffers pigs to attain old age. Because the Jews don't eat pigs, they don't have pork. In order to escape this rumor, Bernice contracted her third marriage in 50 AD with Ptolemy, king of Cilicia, which is in modern Turkey. Ptolemy did not want the marriage, but was persuaded by a great deal of money. So Bernice marries Ptolemy to make it look like she's married and not in a relationship with her brother, basically. Ptolemy's like, oh, okay, whatever, I'll take all the money and claim Bernice as one of my wives. When the report went that she had criminal conversation, basically, she slept with her brother Agrippa, Bernice persuaded Ptolemy, who was king of Cilicia, to be circumcised and to marry her, as supposing that by this means she should prove those calumnies upon her to be false. And Ptolemy was prevailed upon, and that chiefly on account of her riches. Yet did not this matrimony endure long. But Bernice left Ptolemy, and, as was said, with licentious intentions. That's according to Josephus in his book Antiquities. She went back to her brother Agrippa. As Bernice and Agrippa were living their Roman-like lives in the early 50s AD, the Christian movement was sprouting right under their noses. While Bernice was in Cilicia, Paul's home area, with Ptolemy, king of Cilicia, they never met. That would be later, about 10 years later, Emperor Claudius, who had brought up or raised Agrippa when he was sent as a young boy to Rome to be educated, gave his friend, whom I brought up and have now with me, the kingdom of Jerusalem in 54 AD, according to Josephus. Agrippa and 22-year-old Bernice traveled between their palace in Tarsus and their palace in Jerusalem. Agrippa made sure the work on his great-grandfather Herod's second temple was completed. Herod's 35-acre temple compound had been started in 19 BC, but the work on and ornamentation of the huge complex was not completed until Herod Agrippa II in 63 AD, 67 years after Herod's death, and only 7 years before its destruction by the Romans in 70 AD. 10 years had passed since Paul and Bernice, Agrippa's sister, were in Cilicia during her brief marriage to Ptolemy, king of Cilicia. It is sure they never met at that time, but they would meet several days after Paul had been calumniated before Festus by the Jerusalem priests. Bernice was now 32, and her brother/lover, Agrippa, her brother, was 33. The two arrived in Caesarea to kindle the relationship between Agrippa, who oversaw the temple in Jerusalem for Rome, and the new Roman procurator, Festus. Paul is to undergo another trial before Festus. Agrippa and Bernice were where he would plead his case for Christ, which the Jews in Jerusalem opposed. In the audience room that day were high-ranking military officers, prominent men of the city, along with Paul, Festus, Bernice, and Agrippa, who had told Festus he would like to hear this Paul himself. So this is, if you go to earlychurchhistory.org /politics/incest of Agrippa II and Bernice, you can get more on that story, basically. So that's to give you some of this backstory of what's happening here. So now they're coming together to listen to this Paul. Verse 14, when they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's cause unto the king, saying, there is a certain man left in bonds by Felix, about whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me, desiring to have judgment against him. To whom I answered, it is not the manner of the Romans to deliver any man to die, before that he which is accused have the accusers face to face, and have license to answer for himself concerning the crime laid against him. Therefore, when they were come hither, without any delay on the morrow, I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought forth. Against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought none accusation of such things as I supposed. So he's going, look, I listened to their stuff, but there's nothing there. They really want this guy. And if we don't turn him over, they're going to riot and cause problems, and it's going to be bad for our political positions, basically, in the Roman government. So we're in a quandary here. Verse 19, but had certain questions against him of their own superstition, and one of Jesus, which was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. So the Jews want Paul dead for personal reasons. They don't have a legal case against him, basically, but they're accusing him of this different religion, this different interpretation of Judaism that came from Jesus, basically. And that's why they want him dead. Verse 20, and because I doubted of such manner of questions, I asked him whether he would go to Jerusalem and there be judged of these matters. But when Paul had appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. So that's the emperor at this time was Nero. So Caesar was Nero at this time. Now we know Nero and the Christians don't get along, and this is part of the beginning of that problem. Basically, not caused by this problem. This isn't what started it, but Nero doesn't like the Christians. Mainly because the Christians don't do Caesar worship. They don't worship the emperor, which he is the emperor. And so there's a lot of persecution against him. The Great Roman Fire is blamed on the Christians when that happens in the Senate. So there's a part of the city in Rome, a big suburb of Rome, that's where the senators and the wealthy live. It burns to the ground. Nero accuses the Christians of it. They persecute the heck out of the Christians. That's kind of the beginning of a lot of Christian persecution, which is why there's a lot of argument that Nero is the Antichrist mentioned in the book of Revelations, we're going to get to when we get to that book, and beginning lots of persecutions against them. But history today shows most likely Nero started the fire so that he could justify kicking all the senators out and building more monuments to himself. Basically, put a massive bathhouse in and other things to himself in those areas. So that's what's going to happen. So Nero is Caesar. So that's where Paul's going to go to testify and speak before Nero. Verse 22. So Festus has just explained to Agrippa what's going on. Now verse 22. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would also hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, thou shalt hear him. So he's like, I want to hear from this guy too and understand this. And so Festus is like, all right, tomorrow, let's bring him into the judgment seat and you can question him. So verse 23, on the morrow, when Agrippa was come, and Bernice with great pomp, and was entered into the place of hearing with the chief captains and principal men of the city, at Festus's commandment, Paul was brought forth. So we're going to see this discussion. Hugh Nibley adds a commentary on this. He says, Paul was to be the fall guy. The governor gave a magnificent reception for Agrippa and Bernice, and Paul was brought in as part of the entertainment. As Professor Garrod has shown, the standard form of entertainment at high-class Roman parties was listening to rhetorical recitals as we listen to music. Paul was part of the show and played his part very skillfully by an oration that put everybody into high good humor. He flattered Herod as the great authority on all Jewish matters, and Festus as the model judge and governor. When Festus joked that Paul had become balmy with too much study, they all laughed, and when Agrippa topped that by saying that Paul had almost converted him, they laughed even louder. When the higher-ups and their wives talked it over among themselves, they agreed that there was nothing wrong with Paul, but to Caesar he must go. So the little nobody who got some hoods mad at him in the streets of a provincial town in Asia Minor ends up with personal letters to the emperor of the world. Basically, that's kind of Hugh Nibley's summary of what we're going to be talking about more. So let's move on, verse 24. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all men which are here present with us, ye see this man, about whom all the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me, both at Jerusalem and also here, crying that he ought not to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself hath appealed to Augustus, I have determined to send him, of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord. Wherefore I have brought him forth before you, and especially before thee, O King Agrippa, that after examination had I might have somewhat to write. For it seemeth to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not withal to signify the crimes laid against him. So they're trying to understand, how can we phrase this letter to send Paul away from us and to Caesar, to Nero, basically. So that's unfortunately where this chapter ends. Let's jump over to the next chapter as we continue the book of Acts.